Picture Rome in 186 BCE. The Republic stands at the height of its power. Legions conquer distant lands. Aqueducts carry water across impossible distances. Law and order define civilization itself. But beneath the marble temples, in chambers carved from solid stone, something else is happening. Something Rome's own historians would later struggle to explain. This is the story of a practice so deeply buried that scholars are still debating its full scope today. Not because the evidence doesn't exist, but because successive generations worked systematically to destroy it. What we're examining isn't mythology, it's documented legal practice, archaeological evidence, and fragmentary testimonies that survive despite centuries of deliberate erasure. And it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, religion, and the systems we inherit without examination. Let's start with what we know for certain. Roman marriage was fundamentally different from modern Western marriage. It wasn't primarily about love or partnership. It was a legal transaction transferring a woman from her father's authority to her husband's control. This transfer was called manus, literally hand. The woman passed from one hand to another. But Roman law required something before this transfer could be completed. Multiple legal texts reference a prerequisite called purification. The Latin term appears repeatedly, purificatio. Before a bride could legally become a wife, she had to be purified. The 12 Tables, Rome's foundational legal code from around 450 BCE, contains a provision stating that brides of proper Roman families required purification by appointed religious authorities before marriage could be finalized. These authorities were priests of fertility cults, particularly those associated with Bona Dea, the good goddess. For decades, classical scholars interpreted this as symbolic ritual washing or ceremonial blessing. That interpretation has become increasingly difficult to maintain. Starting in the early 20th century, archaeologists began discovering purpose-built chambers beneath major Roman temples. These weren't burial crypts or storage rooms. They had very specific architectural features. Stone beds carved directly from rock, drainage channels cut into floors, and doors designed to lock only from the outside. The most significant discovery came in 2003 during excavations beneath the Temple of Bona Dea on the Aventine Hill. Archaeologists found one of these chambers fully intact. The walls were covered with inscriptions, hundreds of names, all female, each paired with dates that corresponded to known Roman wedding celebrations from the same periods. British archaeologist Catherine Johns documented these inscriptions in a comprehensive 2007 report. Her findings noted that the names appeared hastily carved, suggesting they weren't official commemorations but personal inscriptions made by the women themselves. The question becomes, what was happening in these chambers? Roman legal texts are remarkably evasive on this point. They mandate the purification ritual but refuse to describe its specifics. Later medieval copyists working with Roman manuscripts frequently censored or destroyed passages that referenced these practices directly. We do have fragments. The playwright Plautus, writing around 205 BCE, referenced the ritual in a comedy. Most of the relevant passages were removed in later copies, but surviving fragments include a line, "The gods take their portion before any man." That is the law. The philosopher Lucretius addressed it more directly in the 1st century BCE. His text was nearly lost. Entirely medieval monks attempted to erase these passages, and we only have them because a single manuscript was rediscovered in 1417. Lucretius wrote that certain religious rites were called sacred, but they are terra, and that what the priest claims to offer the gods, he takes for himself, and the law shields this theft with the word divine. Roman medical texts provide additional context. The physician Soranus, writing in the 2nd century CE, casually notes in a gynecological treatise that many brides showed signs of physical injury on their wedding night. He then mentions that the traditional wedding veil served to prevent the husband from observing evidence of the purification ritual, which might provoke inappropriate questions. Let that sink in. The veil wasn't about modesty, it was about concealment. The system had multiple layers of protection. The ritual was religious, making it sacred and unquestionable. It was legal, making it mandatory. It was secret, making testimony illegal. Roman law specifically prohibited women from revealing details of certain religious mysteries under penalty of exile or death. This wasn't a loophole in the system. This was the system working exactly as designed. The machinery was elegant in its cruelty. The perpetrators claimed divine authority. The law enforced silence. Society called it tradition. And the victims had no legal recourse whatsoever. Understanding this requires us to grasp something fundamental about Roman religion. It was transactional. You gave something to the gods, and they returned favor. Grain for fertility, wine for victory, animals for protection. But in marriage ritual, the offering wasn't livestock. It was the bride herself. The year 186 BCE marks a turning point in this hidden history. A woman named Hespera Ficenia came before the Roman consuls with testimony about the Bacchanalia, secret religious rites operating across Italy. According to the historian Livy, she described underground gatherings, sexual coercion, and abuse carried out under priestly authority. The Senate's response was immediate and massive. They launched investigations. They arrested priests. They closed temples. They executed leaders of the Bacchanalia. Rome declared these rites a foreign corruption threatening moral order. But here's the critical detail. During these investigations, multiple women attempted to testify about similar practices within the marriage purification ritual. The Senate refused to hear them. Livy records Consul Spurius Postumius stating, "The Bacchanalia are foreign perversions, the rites of Bona Dea are Roman tradition. We do not investigate tradition." That single sentence explains how abuse survives across centuries, by calling itself tradition, by claiming that age equals legitimacy, by insisting that if something has always been done, it must be sacred rather than criminal. Most women who tried to speak were silenced through legal threats, but one refused. Her name wasn't recorded. She stood in the forum and described what had happened beneath the temple. She named the ritual, she named the priests. She was arrested within hours, charged with impiety and public obscenity, exiled to Sicily, and forbidden from speaking to Roman citizens. She disappears from the historical record at that point, but not everything vanished. In 1964, archaeologists discovered graffiti scratched into stone near the Roman Forum, dating to roughly 180 BCE. It reads, "Tradition is what monsters call their crimes when no one stops them." Someone risked everything to carve that message into the heart of Roman power. The practice didn't end immediately, it adapted. By the 1st century BCE, wealthy families found ways around it. Instead of subjecting their daughters to the chambers, they paid enormous bribes for what priests called symbolic purification, a ceremony without the underground room. The priests accepted these bribes readily, because it was never really about the gods. It was about power and access. Once wealth could purchase exemption, the ritual revealed its true nature, a system designed to grant powerful men sanctioned access to vulnerable women, protected by law and religious language. By the start of the Common Era, the practice had largely disappeared among Rome's elite, but it continued among the lower classes for another century. Poor families couldn't afford bribes. The poet Juvenal, writing around 100 CE, notes bitterly, "The poor still offer their daughters to the old gods. The rich offer gold instead." The practice didn't end because Rome found it immoral. It ended because wealthy men decided they didn't want it happening to their own daughters. For centuries, classical scholars minimized these accounts or dismissed them as unreliable. They described the evidence as too fragmented, the sources too emotional. They suggested exaggeration, misinterpretation, anything except confronting what the material actually showed. But in the last 2 decades, that denial has become harder to justify. New archaeological discoveries, improved dating methods, and trauma-informed analysis of ancient texts have created a clearer picture. In 2018, a research team affiliated with the American Academy in Rome published a comprehensive study analyzing legal codes, architectural evidence, literary fragments, and medical writings. Their conclusion, carefully worded but clear: the available evidence strongly suggests that premarital religious purification rituals in Roman culture included sexual assault of brides by religious authorities, systematized through legal, social, and religious structures. This history isn't only about what Rome did, it's also about who resisted. The woman who stood in the forum knowing it would destroy her life. The artist who painted a hidden fresco in Pompeii showing a bride being led underground, then sealed the room before Mount Vesuvius erupted. The person who carved that graffiti into stone. The families who quietly paid bribes because they loved their daughters more than they feared divine punishment. None of them could stop the system alone, but they documented it. They left traces. They refused to let it vanish completely. Stand in Rome today and visit the ruins of the Temple of Bona Dea on the Aventine Hill. Beneath it lies the excavated chamber. You can still see the names carved into walls. Julia, Cornelia, Flavia, names scratched hastily, carefully engraved. No family titles, just proof of existence. They couldn't speak, they couldn't testify, they couldn't refuse, but they carved their names into stone anyway, hoping someone, someday, would see them and understand. We are that someday. The machinery behind this ritual isn't ancient. Abuse disguised as tradition, protected by religious authority, enforced by law, maintained through silence. That pattern appears in every culture, in every era. The question has never been whether it happened. The question is whether we're willing to look, to examine our own inherited traditions, and to name abuse even when it wears the language of faith or history. Stone remembers. And now we are the witnesses.